While the top issue was being debated during that period, Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Tim Geithner, who was then the president of the New York Fed, and a handful of other very powerful people were sitting behind closed doors, getting ready to lend out trillions, underlying trillions, of taxpayer dollars to large financial institutions and corporations with no debate going on in Congress, no debate whatsoever. Now, on March 3rd, 2009, and I'm a member of the Budget Committee, the Senate Budget Committee, I asked the Fed chairman, Mr. Bernanke, to tell the American people the names of the financial institutions that received this unprecedented backdoor bailout from the Fed, how much they received, and the exact terms of this assistance. And I will never forget that. I asked Mr. Bernanke for that information. He said, Senator, nope, not going to give it to you, not going to make it public. Well, on that day, I introduced legislation to make that information public, working with a number of members of the House and the Senate. Some strange bedfellows, very conservatives, progressives came together on this issue. We managed to get into the Wall Street reform bill a disclosure provision. And just on December 1st, last week, that information was made public. And let me talk a little bit about what was in that information made public by the Fed. After years of stonewalling, the American people have learned the incredible and jaw-dropping details of the Fed's multi-trillion-dollar bailout of Wall Street and corporate America, not just Wall Street, one of the things that we learned. The emergency response, which is what the Fed described their action as during the Wall Street collapse, appears to any objective observer to have been the clearest case that I can imagine of socialism for the very rich and rugged free market capitalism for everybody else. In other words, if you are a huge financial institution whose recklessness and greed caused this great recession, no problem. You are going to receive a substantial amount of help from the taxpayers of this country. Furthermore, what we now know is the extent of the bailout for the large financial corporations. Goldman Sachs received nearly $600 billion. Morgan Stanley received nearly $2 trillion. Citigroup received $1.8 trillion. Bear Stearns received nearly $1 trillion, and Merrill Lynch received some $1.5 trillion in short-term loans from the Fed. But I think what is most surprising for the American people is not just the bailout of Wall Street and the financial institutions and the bailout of large American corporations like General Electric, but I think the American people would find it very strange that at a time when the American automobile sector was on the verge of collapse, and goodness only knows how many thousands and thousands of jobs we have lost in automobile manufacturing in this country, that the Federal Reserve was also bailing out Toyota and Mitsubishi, two Japanese car makers, by purchasing nearly $5 billion worth of their commercial paper from November 5th, 2008 through January 30th, 2009. While virtually no American-made cars or products of any kind are bought in Japan, I think the American people would be shocked to learn that the Fed extended over $380 billion to the Central Bank of Japan to bail out banks in that country. And in my view, and I think I speak for millions and millions of Americans on this, there is a war going on in this country, and I'm not referring to the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan. I'm talking about a war being waged by some of the wealthiest, the most powerful people in this country against the working families of the United States, against the disappearing and shrinking middle class of our country. The billionaires of America are on the warpath. They want more and more and more. And that has everything to do with this agreement reached between the Republicans and the president. Who is winning and who's losing in the economy? You know, I come from New England. Everybody follows the Celtics, and we follow the Red Sox, and we follow the Patriots. And when everyone says, okay, who won the game? Patriots win or they lose? That's what you want to know. Who's winning, who's losing? And in fact, in America, it's pretty clear in the economy who's winning and losing. Vast majority of people, working people, middle-class people, low-income people are losing. That's who's losing. And it is very clear who is winning. The wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well. They are winning the economic struggle. In America today, Mr. President, and again, we don't talk about this too much. We don't talk about it too much, but it's time we did. In America today, we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income in the industrialized world. Now, I haven't heard too many people, Mr. President, talk about that issue. Why not? Our Republicans Republican colleagues want huge tax breaks for the richest people in this country, but the reality is that the top 1% already today owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. How much more do they want? When is enough enough? You want it all? We already have millions of families today that have zero wealth. They own less, they owe more than they own. Millions of families have zero, below zero wealth. We are living in a situation where the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. Top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. And Mr. President, that is simply unacceptable. Today in our country, and this is something we must be absolutely ashamed about and have got to address, that instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires, maybe we should appreciate the fact that about 25% of our children are dependent on food stamps. We should understand that in the industrialized world, the United States of America has as this chart shows, the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. Is this America? Is this America? The United States today has over 20% of its kids living in poverty. In Finland, the number is about 2 or 3%. Norway, maybe 4%. Sweden, maybe 4.5%. Switzerland, 6%, whatever it may be. But here we are. If you're watching on television, what you're seeing is the red line. Here's the United States, well over 20%. Here's the Netherlands in second place. Looks to me like about 7%. This is the future of America. So we're sitting here talking about an agreement which says let's give huge tax breaks to billionaires, and here's the reality. We have a rate of childhood poverty far, far surpassing any other country on earth. And let me tell you something else. I don't know that we have a chart for this, but it is the other half of the equation. What do you think happens when you have millions and millions of kids living in poverty? What do you think happens when you have kids who are dropping out of school when they're 13 or 14? I will tell you what happens. Because I talked to a fellow in Vermont who runs one of our jails. And he said that about half the kids who drop out of school end up in the penal system. That's what happens. So the result is the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. And then what we end up with is more people behind bars than any other country on earth. You got that? China is a communist, totalitarian society. much, much larger than the United States of America, which is a democratic society. We have more people in jail than China and more people in jail than any other country. The 10th largest credit card issuer in this country, an entity called Premier Bank, is now offering a credit card with a 79.9% interest rate and a $300 credit limit. What do we make of that? 10th largest credit card issuer in this country charging 79% interest rates, and we allow that to go on? These are crooks. These are no different than the gangsters who beat up people on street corners when they didn't get payment back, except now the gangsters are wearing three-piece suits and sitting in some fancy suite on Wall Street.
And that is Bernie Sanders.